Under the facade of promoting free speech, colleges have repressed it through regulation of appropriate space and time. Its hidden form of censorship forces protest into spaces where it is ineffective. Mitchell 3. The Supreme Court upheld that statement punished those who abuse its freedom and biblical peace and early established for a foundation of contemporary free speech, developed language, and law for regulation as necessary to strengthen the state. Liberalization, protecting at the heart of speech, separation, space, not being what is said, and the effects of the irony, free speech, and liberalization, guardians, inspiration, Jewish or crucial to liberal free speech first is where that speech occurs. There was nothing wrong, false, shining fire in the war in the middle, wilderness, social regulation becomes a surrogate for regulation, content before has created means to be regulated where things may be said that more effectively science is censorship for repression under the speech regime being constructed. This speech can only be effective when it's illegal. Voice shows contentious politics is treated as necessary if effective free speech is to be retained. Zoning is reminiscent of the McCarthy era and the faults of COINTELPRO. Repression cloaked in law and gives authorities the power to construe civil disobedience as domestic terrorism, especially in this post-9/11 era. Mitchell 3. Liberalization of free speech has not always been progressive. Geographical analysis shows that what appears progressive is a means for suppression rights have been won through struggle, though against struggle on the set of history of government recidivism, Palmer, Reason, McCarthy, and the anti-COINTELPRO cloaked in law justifies urgent legitimate state when challenges are being made to the steps where the closing of states and protests makes civil disobedience terroristic. Wrong has purchased become more and more tightly likely on lawsuit work and demonstration increase the intersection that new oppressive state and the weak of subject level with speech and some liberalization pretends of frightening error silence through strategic geography. This geography implies that speech becomes dangerous and thus legal as it becomes effective. That necessarily means effective protest becomes legal. What's left is empty. Mitchell 3. The future embrace homes and check that the ultimate good is reached by appreciating an idea the truth is sought to accept in the market. That is problematic as no means to recognize the difference of power reacts to the market. It puts in distinct between speech and content that can prohibit, including picketing on the basis that it attended to draw crowd speech was worth protecting to the degree that it was not effective protection of speech serves particularly protest to the truth of the state criticism can be quieted by anything construed legitimacy and interest. All manner of speaking may be banned. Prohibition persuading us implicated space regulations of regime and control of practice to basic speak and listen consequently means that limiting space to become increasingly geographic. Public space where necessary not only speech, political organizing, and discussing public questions and must not be denied based on regulation geography. Hate found elected true limit more effective than had been possible for the full flowering truly liberal speech regime we are all for. Education is increasingly driven by neoliberal forces. Student activism is key to retake the political sphere and democratize elite education against market-driven logic. Williams 15. Economic and ideological depravity and neoliberalism has been brought to bear on education in very constant public as negative characteristics and competition as well as teach the massive standard assessing our features of schooling seen as private rather than public good. The question of public education for the radical transformation violating the unjust society seems rarely asked. Inclusion and success are limited and narrowly conceived individually competitive measures of market advantage. Everyday students to engage in political struggle and get acting. Pedagogy has seeked on veils political structure. Chilean student movement stands as one example. Challenging pedagogy. Students have been the center of largest, most sustained political action seen in Chile since the 80s. Chile students have fundamentally influenced the nationwide education reform and they have led a nationwide dialogue on social justice in Chile. The world develops to assume the role of an academic fighting neoliberalism to reclaim the academy in higher education. Neoliberalism is violent and uses normativity as a shield to hide their lives of oppression, refuse the ethical criterion, and embrace higher education's true calling. Giroux 13. The call to be objective echo the official treaty to reduce the role of functionary engaged in formula to ritual inputs from the determining problem, hiding behind appeals to object to be academics to combine the roles of critical educator and activist industry within this project and possibility pedagogy measures is purposefulized. Most one they use doctrine or instrumentalize or both pedagogy must also gain momentum on students while producing new ideas and produce neutrality, purple legislation, economy. There are argued for very different from the one that is on display in the current political system in which they feel trapped. Neoliberalism produces international conflicts and environmental collapse, extinction, Ehrenfeld 5. Climate change, resource exhaustion, damage to aggregate existence, spread of passion, make the system unstable. Our ability to manage global systems depends on being able to protect has been greatly exaggerated. Purposes against social trade, wide even the bomb, new technology, unfettered combination, weak social institution, weakened states, corporation, ecosystem will be started. American to the end of the system will be a debt or resource, environmental destruction. Environment is a true bottom line for its plantation of term economic growth of nations. Tech improvements will not be sufficient or may not occur without social change. Neoliberalism rips apart communal bonds to maintain the illusion that structural inequalities are individual problems. The impact is systematic victim blaming, poverty, and violence. Smith 12. This is linked to neoliberalism and individualism. Violence considering neoliberalism exists and that when United society says we're responsible for well-being, this focus on the individual can lead to violence. We social bonds free a person to engage in deviancy. Neoliberalism and the tendency to value individual over society, tear apart social bonds and contribute to ego-driven crimes, individualization, and judicial climate where structural inequality convert individual problems. Student protests oppose neoliberalism in higher education, translating theory into praxis. Delgado and Ross 16. Students are opening new possibilities with commodification education. They have become strategic notes for transformation, higher education, recreation, new forms of subaltern counter-hegemony. Student moves are disrupting and transfer progressive reforms in today's corporate academia. Student moves propose radical practice. Students are well-positioned to political actors. Students are catalysts political social action. Thus the plan. Result, public colleges and universities in the United States ought not restrict constitutionally protected speech free speech zones. Free speech zones limit student discourse and should be prohibited. Hudson 16. College and universities have free speech and people can speak in only specific location. The great number that early 2000s wait for ambition to deal with controversial expressions. Zoning speech is troubling when it reduces the overall amount of speech on campus. College campuses should be a place where free speech not only survives but thrives. The First Amendment protects only public discourse about public interest. Weinstein 11. Rigorous protection applies within public discourse because it's a matters of public concern, essential public democratic self-governance. Said this around people, governance and democracy, and discuss rules, norms, conditions, not just the content of what the expected will be but also setting, modes of communication, forms, social, public discourse, and media and constitution protected. Each instance will also be protected. Free speech shows and no protest and infringe of protected speech and shut down and prompt uprising, which is the most effective form of resistance and forced reform efforts advancing the will of the established system. Mitchell 3. The judge stated free speech might benefit public safety, perfectly lots of ads in the court. Found 300 zone too great a burden to give the spatial sensitivity. It's unlikely that large scale protests constitutional can stand. Scrutiny is most important distinction protest. No protest was necessary because impromptu protest by the effectiveness of sociological protests for the spontaneity that caught the public's imagination absurd and political debate in the world to establish zones in advance have been effective where protests are kept out by barricades and police. The top of the official protest zone and fence parking lot. Protests are found on defense of having banned their taxes and rights to the established order. Under view. Use reasonability with a bright line of in-round structural abuse. This means that T in theory need to prove an argument or practice excuse for civil rights is valid, not just qualitative harms. Prefer 1, bright line self-judgment, measure have a clear metric to determine abuse is non-arbitrary. 2, competing interprets lead to a racist bond debation. Always nitpicks on minor fault of interpretation, such a marginal advantage, even the absence of actual abuse outweighs. Since A ensures theory functions as check and abuse. My brand is key to making sure theory is run in the only face of insurmountable abuse and strategic tool to run rounds. B, education, holding debaters accountable, answering arguments instead of whining, which means more topical debate instead of debate about the rules of debate. We should both try to win the round, so you shouldn't win because I might have made it more difficult. C, proportionality balance the ultimate punishment. It's reversed for the most egregious crimes. Competing interest creates absurd scenarios where 1% risk often meets an auto loss, but that's ridiculous. Over punishment kills fairness. D, accessibility. Most intuitive response to your being abusive. Explain why the decision is fair, but the defense is insufficient on your competing interpretation methodology. Pursue debaters who without research can come up with arcane conventions.
Okay, is everyone ready?
Yeah.
What defines in-round structural abuse?
In-round structural abuse is, for instance, a nib that says you have to get through another layer in order to access.
What if I say I lose a lot of ground? Is that in-round structural abuse?
What do you mean a lot of ground?
Just like arguments you could have made. That I could have made.
No, that doesn't constitute structural abuse because it just makes the round difficult for you. That doesn't necessarily mean you should have had access to the ground.
So when is a round so difficult that it constitutes structural abuse?
So I already talked about this to you. That says structural abuse is when you have lack reciprocal access to the ballot. If the app was a really good app that has good evidence,
sure,
that's not structural abuse because it was just harder to answer.
Okay, what does a world without free speech zones look like?
Without free speech zones, it means that colleges can no longer limit student protesters or free speakers or whatever to a particular zone.
Can they not limit them in any way?
Them.
Okay, so the only thing the affirmative does is get rid of physical limits.
It gets rid of zoning. Yeah.
So in the world of the AC, things like speech codes still exist.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so the question becomes, why can't speech codes just recreate the things that you detail?
So what speech codes are you talking about? There are a lot of speech codes.
Okay, never mind. Let's move on. Your Delgado evidence says that protests now are working. Why does the affirmative change that?
So the evidence is not an empirical claim that says there are movements now. It says students are constantly disrupting neoliberal structure. They're constantly acting as nodes for counter-hegemony. This indicates that students have the capability or that they are trying to do this.
Sorry, where is the argument that says that students can't protest in the world of free speech zones?
They can't protest? We read 3 cards on the first part of the app that explain why free speech zones suppress uprising, or not uprising, suppress protests, suppress critique of the college administration.
Why were we able to see all the Not My President protests if the app is true?
So first is that the Not My President protests often occurred off campus and don't concern campus policy. All of our evidence is in the context of the academy that talks about why colleges as educational institutions matter for protests.
Okay, so why were the colleges that held Not My President protests seen?
Which colleges are you mentioning?
Oh, I don't know. I'm just assuming that in a world where there was the potential that it was on a college campus, like college movements, if we had seen them, why is the AC impact true?
So first is that these Not My President protests often occurred off campus. I just talked about that. The next question is that even if they're about the president, they're not about educational policy, which is what all of our Mitchell evidence and the Williams evidence is in the context
of. Where is the harms that the neoliberalism cards detail specific to educational harms?
So the link between education and neoliberalism is very clear. First, in the Williams card, it says that neoliberalism and education is what drives the logic of maximizing profit at all costs. Students are trained to become competitive in the market rather than promoting a social good, which is what leads to neoliberalism.
What's the warrant in that card?
So it says that things like, standardized testing, adjunct professors, assaults on teachership, on tenure, are all examples of neoliberalism co-opting education, which promotes the profit motive over social good.
Are you arguing that student protests are suddenly going to be about only educational reform, or they're going to be more about educational reform in a world where free speech zones are gone? Because if you don't, then how do you access any resolve?
What do you mean there'll be more about education?
Your
argument is that students want to make reform out of education, they're unable to. Beyond that, we also access arguments about why student protest on campus is good in whatever context, not just about education policy.
Sure.
minutes or 4?
I did 4 round 1. I haven't looked it up yet.
The round robin was 5. That's all I know.
If you guys want to do 5, I'm fine with it too.
Alright, let's just go with 5. What can this proportionality thing be used for?
It's a justification for the reasoning belief right line that says a focus on any risk of marginal offense on people shouldn't be a reason to lose.
There's 57 seconds left. Order is 2 off in case. Can I use that?
Yeah.
Actually, my preference is just one right. I'm doing both. Got it.
Got it. Opening it.
I won't read some of the stuff on case, namely the reasonability.
Run me the order. 2 off.
2 off and then case.
Okay.
Substance and then the underview when I'm on case.
Okay.
I'm ready now.
Same.
Whoa. Interpretation Merriam-Webster defines any as ever used to indicate one selective weather restriction. Thus, debaters may not specify a place that free speech ought not be limited to. To clarify, debaters may not read a parametric citation of the topic that entails that certain areas are no longer restricted rather than the whole of a university space. Additionally, the negative may not read plan inclusive counterplans. Violation first, free speech zones are only limited to expressive activities of student protest. Harris, free speech zones limit student demonstrations and other expressive activities out of the way areas for campus. Refer, spirit of the interpretation on I means to force them to actually answer the offense rather than scrolling out standards. Limits affirmatives, like your free speech zones make it impossible for the negative to have allocated ground. You just by saying
the free speech laws not be restricted in any number of places or setting like certain hours of the day or certain specific classroom setting means that there is no stable limitation on the topic of telling your parameterization destroys the negative ability to make stable comparative claims. If I agree to pick their zero competition, you can immediately read any permutation and not only the comparative offense independently. My dissets don't count because in your world speech is still restricted, which means I have no uniqueness in anybody leverage my impact. Both of those you empirically proven. He said that speech codes would still exist in the world of the AC, which means if I was to read the hate speech pick, it would immediately be gone. And at the end of the day, you've made it impossible to read anything outside of the very specific argumentations about free speech zones being good for protests. This is the worst model. Research burdens are absurd. I would have to constantly find very specific offensive. Beta literature flows your way. I spent all my time looking for specific offense. Found literally one prolific card. The first 10 pages of Google search free speech zones are good was literature saying free speech zones are terrible. This proves there's virtually no net ground. In the topical version of the assholes are offense, you can say free speech zones is advantage, and you would be able to weigh against the disads. And limits internally to apprentice. If I don't have stable ground, I can't link arguments. Limits internally to education. Limitless stability is impossible to keep up with. There's constantly too much to prepare for. Solvency advocates don't check back. There's a fashion of different location-based solvency advocates and beta systems that everyone's able to read the entirety of the literature. Disclosure doesn't solve back. Not everyone reads quickly and be grounded. Still, path the district despite my ability to predict fairness is a voter run for crimes. Incentivize debaters by making them feel they have no chance. Education and voter debated, but funded by an educated goal drop. The debater, they should be held to their argument. Drop the argument entails that they can get away with dropping the entirety of the AC and collapsing, which means one, moves the entire time that I put into theory, and two, impossible for us to evaluate what's too abusive versus what's not too abusive, and you can always drop the debater. Competing interpretations. First, the bright line is arbitrary, namely that the judge will always be the decider of what specifically includes in-round abuse claims and what is not in-round abuse claims, which means you're always creating a world where there's judge intervention. You prefer a world without any judge intervention and normative guidelines. A, reasons that we can always learn who the better debater is independent of biases. B, putting in biases automatically means that the ground will always be screwed against someone who doesn't go against those biases. You allow racists to always talk about you allow racists to judge based on their racial beliefs when we would prefer a world that's inclusive. And no RBI's first chilling effect. You can always be a abusive debater and read abusive arguments to justify the RBI. Second is a non sequitur. You don't win for being fair. You just get to compete because you're being fair. Critique. Reform is a lie. There's nothing the biopolitical state can't overcome through vision. Scholium. The order winning has reached untold summits as reorders and progressively can recapture public space, covered campus, and any surveillance now possible to become acceptable. List of suspects circulating. We can suppose kids will probably use the social spaces now military marked concealed and gossip. Transformed by recruitment of West versus substance and new micro-legal constraints. To try to be visible is to lose. Independently get to the critique and terminal defense invisible committee. To be visible is to be vulnerable and left to make their cause more visible. They do exactly what the contrary must be done. Turning and enemy to which we can relegated to advantage rates in vulnerable position or attack. To be socially nothing is the condition where maximum freedom and action. Visibility must be avoided. You will be in a position to pulverize or will be crushed. Invisible alternatives are failures. The sphere of political representation is fundamentally closed and functions as an echo chamber to simply reproduce the same failed strategies to allow for the continued consolidation of power among elites. Turns the app, the invisible committee. Whatever angle you look at it from, there's no escape from the present. Those who claim to have solutions to power group proven almost immediately. Everything can only go from bad to worse. There's no future for the future. The sphere of political representation is closed from left to right. It's the same. Nothing is changing up there. Discourse according to the latest dispatches from the information services and anonymous attacks, wordless destructions of the better must be wide open split between politics and political. This all made no demands and had no mission on the director, which is nothing to do with politics. You have to be blind to see what's purely political about the result. Mood negation of politics. There's no social solution to the present situation. None of the problems formulated in the social language are resolvable. Never have so many people devoted themselves each to their own special argument, each with their own specially missing solution. To make micropolitics visible is to co-opt by giving resistance an object. This understanding allows resistance to be framed, to be declared a failure, and prevents the menace of imperceptible politics from coalescing around mundane practices and habitudes of existence. BLM proves resistance from the public sphere does nothing. It gets framed as racist or reductionist by people like Tony Lahren, doing similar moments of failure. Politics needs to be hidden to be successful. Tianos. Imperceptible politics connect with all those various forms of political engagement and intervention in an opportunistic way. It cannot be reduced to one form of politics. Imperceptible politics is always enacted as ad hoc practice, less the decomposition of the representational strategies in a particularly field. The composition convention cannot be left unanswered by the existing regime of control. The imperceptible politics is objectionless. It performs political transformation without primarily targeting specific political aims or transformation of a law or institution or a particular theme for inclusion. Imperceptible politics is not intentional. There lies the difference from the state-oriented politics of the political politics of civil rights movement and instigate challenges through a series of everyday transformation which can only be codified as having essential political aim or function in retrospect, driven by a firm belief in the importance of truthfulness of act without seeking any evidence for or conducting any investigation to practice. Cut the card there. The alternative is a politics of invisibility. The only way to revolt is to not exist. Invisible committee. Threats cannot be welcomed. They must be absorbed. Threat system have an energy. It's a vice and a slice with the unsolved possibilities. Police it would just be a matter of finding the balance between repression to decrease noise and intelligence about the state of society. Both in a signal resistance should not condense every interference as the prime vector of result. All makes revolt possible. Case. Overview to the affirmative. Nowhere do you justify the neoliberalism goes away as a result of protests. So long as that's true, you can never weigh the neoliberal bad offense a unique reason to affirm. Also, if you prove that the school results are offense, you can only vote on the turn. Free speech soon stop agents of the state from any protest. ACLU. The police are charged with safeguarding during a demonstration with the use of power to stop you as long as you're observing time, place, and manner restriction. The police may not break up the gathering unless there's a clear and present danger. Police officers may not use their powers in a way to chilling effect. This means free speech zones uniquely good. Your world justifies things like the Apple backlash to stop protests and reify neoliberal attacks turns case and spoil resolve your offense. A social media lets any protest be seen at any moment. physical presence means nothing. B, students can protest off campus grounds if they create the condition detailed. C, students who protest online, they can make petitions, get Twitter campaigns. D, all your evidence is about now rather than if there were no free speech. And just read Delgado. That means the status quo is fine to access your impacts. Additionally, uniqueness of is linked to the app. Free speech zones exist in only 1/6 of colleges fire. Roughly 1 in 6 American top colleges in the face of free speech zones. Either 1/5/6 of the colleges is enough, or 2 it isn't, and you can never access your impacts. Let's go to the underview. Your reasonability arguments are bad. First, there's no way for you to determine what is in-round abuse versus not in-round abuse, which means there's always going to be Erik's decision. Independently, we meet the burden of in-round abuse, namely that I can't read any topical argumentation because of the topical arguments don't specifically linked to that. Independently, I've given you reasons why the research burdens are worse, because there's always a world where your free speech zones are going to be so good that there's no arguments against it specific to the round context. Independently, your A point, you don't meet the interpretation detail, namely that we are always going to have a world where it's net worse for the negative to ever access any impacts. Additionally, there's no way for me to access any independent impacts when there are always going to be a world where I can't make any exclusive change. Your B point argument was that it's all educational. The first is a turn that we use topical education when we can't make any topical arguments. The second is that educative arguments are only possible in a world that's framed by the ability to stop abuse, namely that if abuse exists in the world of the AC, then we can never access education because we're always being abused. The third argument is proportionality, but this is nonsense. The first argument is that norms are the only way to evaluate claims, namely in the same function as a offense-defense paradigm. Risk of offense is always better. The second argument is that it places certain practice to be unacceptable. A world where we always drop the argument on reasonable claims is a world where a prioris would still exist. It is empirically proven that if we go for different arguments and if we go for competing interpretation, then we can phase out bad practices. Your D point is nonsense. First, you are also non-inclusive because you are abusive, which means you exclude people who can read abuse. Second argument is that this doesn't change that abuse is bad.
Alright, ready?
Yeah.
Let's start on the alternative to the critique.
Yeah.
What does it mean to engage in invisible?
So I think some good examples are the Invisible Committee in and of themselves. They were an anonymous group in France that led anarchist movements. I think another good example is
Is
the internet.
France an anarchy?
No, we would argue that it was still the better strategy to confront the French
Wait,
state.
how is it better
It also-
strategy if it didn't do anything?
That doesn't mean, like, if a strategy doesn't work once, that doesn't mean the strategy is always
Alright,
gonna
name
fail.
one time where
Like, there have
invisible...
been hundreds of protests that have failed, like
Okay,
BLM.
name one example where an invisible strategy that had no political object achieved something.
The no political object question seems to be different than what the critique entails.
No,
we
your
think
Tiano's
that
evidence
an
says
impercep-
that your movement has no specific political objective. It's constantly shifting.
So we're
and
namely
amorphous.
focusing on like an overall macro goal. Amorphous
What's
being
the
that
macro goal?
it is progressive in and of itself rather than like we focus on one strategy.
Okay,
Whereas
how is
So the
having
macro
specific
goal would
political
be-
objectives distinct from having one macro goal?
we would argue that, the first argument is that this continuous on small objective changes is just fed to us by the state, namely
Okay.
that they'll give us small things to avoid giving us big things. Second
So
argument
the
is
macro goal is to overthrow the state.
we'd argue that that would be a good way to get rid of the neoliberal institutions that you detail.
All right.
Namely, all your
yeah,
impacts.
sure. Let's talk about your link argument.
Yeah.
So this says that the biopolitical mechanism, the state is constantly surveilling us.
Yes.
How does the alternative solve that?
We'd argue that not using surveilled spaces like the public space is better.
So like
Namely,
just meeting in our houses and like talking
meeting
about.
in our houses, meeting in small groupings
Okay,
in
yeah,
areas
that's fine.
under
Let's talk
bridges
about
on
your-
the internet is a very good
All right,
one.
let's talk about your T argument. Under your interpretation, can the app specify a type of speech?
We would argue no, that it is not.
Okay, so it may not specify a type of speech, and it may not specify a place.
We'd argue that any specification of a place is a specification
All
of
right,
a type
sure.
of speech, and that the resolution posits that we must defend
That's,
all forms of speech.
yeah,
as
that's
the
fine.
affirmative.
So the app defends that we defend all types of speech, right? We defend that every type of speech, we
Alex,
remove
you
restrictions on
literally
every
told
type
me
of
that
speech.
you aren't getting rid of speech.
That's
codes.
correct. We don't get rid of speech codes.
We would argue
okay,
that, that
would
means
your
certain speech
would
is
your app
restricted in the world
allow
of the AC.
would your T-interp allow an app that removes speech codes?
That removes speech codes, yes. We would argue that if it removes speech codes, then that would be an entire form of speech.
All right, let's talk
Independently,
about.
we think a
that's
better form
fine.
of the affirmative is one that says we ought not
Yeah,
restrict any
that's okay.
constitutional
Let's talk
speech.
about your ACLU
That
evidence
would
now
be
in the
included
case.
in the arguments we detail. Yeah.
It says that free speech zones are necessary. All this card says is that when some protests get out of hand, then police will come in and break them up. How do free speech zones solve
So
that?
free speech zones are definitionally a place where the police cannot object to what is being said, namely that content restrictions aren't
Why is
possible.
that? Why is it that police
You
can't
can't
object
have
to free speech
they're
zones?
content neutral spaces. Any constitutional free speech zone is one that has to be content neutral. That's
Okay,
proven
so
by
the
court
reason that
cases.
it's
Whereas
because
yours
it's
are-
content neutral, the regulation is content neutral, then police can't break it up.
The police can break it up because there's no content
All
that
right.
can be denoted
Yeah,
as
that's fine.
against public safety. Additionally, the world of the AC always allows for the police to destroy public
Okay,
protests.
starting private.
want me to write the rest of the answer from?
I got it. Stop prep. 258 left.
Or
1 second, I'm just gonna send that. Alright. So the order is gonna be T, then case top down, and then the critique.
T, case top down, critique.
Yeah, that's right.
T case K.
Yeah.
Cool. Whenever you're ready.
Counterinterpretation, the affirmative may specify a restriction on free speech to get rid of. To clarify, the app is allowed to remove restrictions that confine speech to a particular place or limited space. The Free Speech Dictionary defines restrict as to keep or confine within physical limits. It says more textually accurate. 1, even if any means all types of free speech. The only topical app is one that restricts free speech's confinement to a particular location. And 2, it's the first definition of the Free Dictionary, which means greater common usage. That solves limits are interpreted as an increase in number of apps. Since the app can only remove geographical regulation on speech, which sets a reasonable limit on top. There are only a handful of apps, such as removing allowing students to pass out pamphlets at the sidewalk, or protesting in the quad, or removing zoning, which is RF. The net benefit is ground 1. Their interpretation excludes a core part of the topic controversy. Our app is the first case mentioned by Champion Grace and touches on a pressing issue in higher education. Absentia, they would allow a single plan which causes stale repetitive debates. 2, specific plans force next research specific answer. Building research fields is available in any field, promotes all other forms of education. Their interpretation causes repetitive debates that destroy education. Now on their interpretation, one is that they tack on the argument that the PICs are not allowed, but this is not derived from the text on the resolution. Doesn't set a predictable limit since apps don't know if the neg is going to read a PIC or not, which justifies specification. Now on their limit standard, 1, lit and generics check the best apps and forces the top since the fringe apps and no supporting literature, and next can reach stock position to be them. 2, forcing the app to defend all types of speech allows the neg to pick out bad types of speech, who flips the prosecute the other way. That now since the 1 AR is already too short to generate new office PICs. 3, just go to top trends since it's already been on my wiki for a month. That means that there are only a handful of apps in my topics, so it means they're not too much to research. They don't say topical version. That doesn't solve since it allows the neg to read distance to other parts of the topic and easily outweigh our relatively small app specifications. Key to standard debate on our specific app. Next, they say they say competing interpretation reasonability is arbitrary, but our bright line solves now in the case. They say that we don't solve all neoliberalism, but that's fine. But education is a key point to the challenging liberalism. That was in Williams' evidence. Now they say ACLU 1 nonsense. Only the college administration has jurisdiction to call in police to break up a protest on campus. Removing restriction means that they can no longer call police in on the campus. 2, the case outweighs a few protests getting out of hand and being broken up. Don't outweigh the majority of protests not being broken up. And 3, empirics disprove prior to free speech and movements in the 60s and 70s were broken up every single time by police. And the DAPL is irrelevant. It's not a college protest, which means it doesn't apply. They say status quo solves. Delgado indicates that the students can act as catalysts. 3x proves that even if they have the capabilities being repressed now. They draw our mutual evidence which says that zoning crushes effective protests, and they say social media. One, social media doesn't create change without so large scale protests. People don't pay attention to Facebook to a dozen protesters in a 30-foot block. Two, tweeting and petitions aren't enough to create the visibility needed to generate change. Coney 2012 proves that online movements aren't enough, and they say off-campus protests on campus are key. The administration can simply ignore off-campus protests about unfair hiring standard discrimination, but on-campus movements force them to deal with the problem. They say that unique so world. So one thinks the colleges are necessary, even if it's true that they don't have free speech. Zones. Even if a lot of colleges don't have free speech zones now, they are increasingly regulated, which shows our mutual evidence means that it's necessary to create a norm now. Now, in reasonability, extend that as long as you don't excuse structural abuse, then you should reject theory. That's creative proportionality. If we win a sufficient number of defense to achieve, then you shouldn't vote on it. Now, on the critique. Allow us to weigh the case against critique. Anything else moves fairness as it shifts the basis of debate and excuse after adding fairness outweighs key contestation, which makes critical education effective. Rigorous discussion and critiques is necessary to determine the desirability of the alt, which turns our reps offense. And turn, we cited several examples. Chile student protests working to transform oppressive struggles, Chilean protests, and Vietnam protests, and Black Lives Matter. If you think protests have never resulted in change, then we have impact on the link. And the alt is stuck in academia, rejected. It does nothing. CX proves Brian 12. The left falls for abstraction and carrying out critiques at prison realistic alternatives. Even though critiques are rapidly stressed and way only academic can understand this revolution greatest from reaction because of draft deal rating ideology. We have a concrete pulse when we do. Critiquing talks to the cynics jump in with the basically conditioning and trying clean motives. 36 how would you do? And we have no concrete proposals, and we're not the law or state affirmation demands that the state and draconian policing is consistent with the alternative Newman 10. The notion of demand making demands that state for anti-policing as the basic strategy of social movements demands not made work in the state of liberty from legislating on the contrary demands are made for outside the political world. They implicitly quality questions legitimate sovereignty of the state. Alt fails. CX proves that merely talking about strategy in secret doesn't do anything for their moves in France resulted in no change and prone to both use invisible strategies and also protests on campus. Their alternative does nothing. They say specific political objectives fall. Specific political objectives fail. That's direct the impact turns that, and also they say that have a macro goal which overthrowing the state. That is also consistent with the app that is negative state action.
I had 57 seconds.
Yeah, 57.
Okay, the order will be T then case. When you send the file.
We both good?
I have it open. Where are you starting?
It'll be an overview on T, and then Alex's arguments, and then my arguments.
Okay.
All good?
Yep.
Overview review on T, none of his arguments were offensive in nature. So long as he doesn't win reasonability, that's enough for you to automatically vote on competing interpretations. If we have specific offense against reasonability that outweighs the proportionality offense that he didn't extend nor extrapolate against the arguments that he detailed, that is enough for you to automatically vote on competing interpretations, which means there's no world where he can win the defensive level of the debate. If that is true, then there's no way that he can win the debate, seeing his offense is enough to show that we give a better model. Additionally, if we prove a topical version of the app is enough for you to get the objectives you detailed, and we A, assume all the benefits that you read in the NR, and B, detail that there is a better world with the topical version of the AC, namely a world with disadvantages, that is the argument that you're going to hedge your vote on. It'll be a game over issue. On counter-interpretation and such, first, in your restriction definition, this doesn't resolve the any violation. Namely, in your world, one restriction is gone. A speech code still exists in the world of the app. You always violate, and your any definition is first not preferable. Competing understanding means that we need to decide the more pragmatic interpretation. Offense determines the correct interpretation. And additionally, you totally conceded in any interpretation, any of it, read no implicit argument that detailed. Namely, you have a restrict violation versus a any violation that you had to weigh against. If we show that you violated any, then that is enough to resolve you actually following restrict. Namely, that you need to restrict in terms of all spaces and all forms of speech on this specific free speech code. If you have not done that, then you always violate textually, independently. If we prove that there is a worse model of the world where your definition of any did, under competing interpretations, you vote. Extend the interpretation that debaters may not specify a place that speech may be restricted. You have conceded the limit standard, and by literally zero offense. As long as that's true, you haven't won your reasonability bright line. If I give it around abuse, that's a game over issue. Let's go to the arguments he detailed about how he checks back. The first argument on limits check back is ridiculous. You can still create any number of restriction with specification that totally outweigh in terms of a case list. You could restrict in a specific math class. You could remove restriction in a specific math class all at your own will, because you decide a very specific location in a very small location. Namely, that you could also restrict or not restrict. You could remove all restrictions around a single well, which makes it impossible for us to ever have any offense, because you're always creating conditions that we can't link any evidence into. Additionally, the main issue that the T evidence, the T argument is about, is not about the nature of restrictions. Rather, it's how many restrictions you don't do. If we can prove offense that details that you're not doing restrictions, means we never get topical ground, then that is enough to automatically justify the ballot. Let's go to it. My show. You can extend the offensive details that disheads are never possible, namely that we have no uniqueness. Alex conceded in his argument that there's always going to be a speech restriction in the world of the AC, namely that you can always get rid of speech codes. You have also conceded the specific example I gave you that I would never be able to read hate speech disheads or any kind of revenge porn disheads, because all those things would set restrictions in the world of the status quo, which means two things. One, there's no topical education that can be garnered from the negative because we have no topical argument. Additionally, we don't have any way to actually access the arguments, which means we have an internally to structural fairness that details that we never had the ability to make specific prep to the round that meets his reasonability bright line and independently creates the conditions that you vote on the offense created by competing interpretations. The inability to access disheads does two things. First, it means that your argument to the topical version of the AC is impossible because we never can argue for disheads on the flow. The second argument means that it is enough to justify the topical version of the app, which we will be going to next, and we will be very much winning. The first argument detailed in the topical version of the app is that you can always create the conditions required because we cannot read plan inclusive counterplans, which means you can always leverage the AC. Your argument against topical version of the apps was don't give him topical version of the apps because he can read disheads. This is ridiculous. There are two reasons that this is not a good guideline as to why a topical version of the affirmative doesn't solve. One, disheads can be weighed against because of the offense you detailed. You have an extinction impact that has been conceded. If you had even a topical version of the AC, that's enough to leverage. Independently, you can create different advantages in the world of the topical version of the affirmative because you can talk about things outside of free speech codes, which means you can weigh the advantages of having free speech outside of that against the disheads. You need to be very, very, very careful in voting the argument that a dishead is enough for you to automatically not prefer a world of the topical version of the AC. If we have proven a topical version of the AC, namely a world where you can read all your offense and I can access my disheads, there's automatically a preferable round to the ballot, which takes out the predictability standard to detailed, which means that you automatically prefer a world on face where you have to defend every form of speech codes comparative to a world where you can defend a very specific form of speech code or speech restrictions, because I can link any disheads or any arguments and he can still assume all the benefits that was detailed, which means there's automatically a game over issue. There's no affirmative that you have uniquely justified. I guess we'll go back to the arguments that Alex read, namely the limits answers. Your limits answers are absurd. Your first argument is that the literature checks, but this is not true. Fringe apps are used more often than non-fringe apps because people don't prepare against them. It's a strategic gain. Additionally, there is no literature on this specific subject. We have proven that when you have conceded the argument that is detailed that the first 10 pages of Google are about free speech good, which means you uniquely have created the conditions that you are saying are going to be checked back, namely that there's always going to be fringe apps in the world of the AC, which is the one exactly like yours. I have no literature to be read that takes out your limits argument and bolsters the claims that were detailed with the concession that there's no way for me to create any arguments. Your second argument is that it is always about picking out of the speech, but the specific specific plank that we added that you missed was that PICs are always going to be not allowed, which means there's no way for you to leverage this offense. Your third argument is disclosure checks. You conceded to your recent disclosure doesn't check. The first argument is that the abuse still exists if it was disclosed or not, namely the nature of the affirmative. The second argument is that not everybody checks disclosure, which means that it's a better norm if you don't focus on just disclosure is the reason where things are over, which means he has effectively no defense against standard detail, no implicit offense. The only argument that he deals with a ground standard, but one that's taken up at the topical version of the AF. Two, these ground standards is ridiculous. It opens up way too many AFs because you can open them specific spaces. Is a cross application of the well example that we detailed earlier, which means there's always going to be a world where there's affirmative offense. You've conceded the argument on reasonability that you make less education, namely that education is destroyed when we're always talking about abusive substances. You have additionally conceded the argument that says you are more abusive because your affirmative is too small and exclusive for people to ever link arguments into, which is two things. One, outweighs the 3-second blip argument he extended for proportionality, and two, shows that competing interpretation creates the conditions that are required. Additionally, you have conceded the competing interpretations argument that says that the judges are always going to be arbitrary in the world of the AC, namely that you decide what in our abuse is. You've also conceded the two weighing examples that say we would prefer a non-arbitrary world. The first one is because it is exclusionary, because you can always have the judge biases exclude certain types of people, and the second argument is that it makes it impossible for us to determine the better debater objectively, which is a net better standard because we can learn educatively without somebody's biases intruding, which is a game over issue. Theory is down to a competing interpretations issue. Alex did not extend any justification for predictability at all, or for reasonability at all. He has conceded a lot of reasons to competing interpretation come first. I cannot read any topical disadvantages. He's conceded topical education weighing. He's conceded there's no literature against this argument, and there's not enough offense read by the AC to justify a non-T ballot.
All right, 258 left. Starting now. The order is in overview, starting on T, and then and then starting on their interp, then our counter interp.
Okay.
You can obviously vote F on substance extend an argument that says the affirmative solves neoliberalism promotes protests by students. If we have one that we have more fairness offense, if we outweigh their teach out, then it's enough for you to vote F. Now, on their interp, they dropped their argument that their interp promotes neg PICs out of an infinite number of types of speech. All their offense that is under limiting now is bad, flips our way since it ensures the neg can read an infinite number of PICs about bad types of speech. Our interp solves by allowing the affirmative some flexibility and to permute PICs. They've also dropped 1 AR warning that says it's worse for the F to have to answer PICs about specific types of speech. In the 1 AR, since 4 minutes is already too short to generate new offense against PICs, they thought that we didn't answer their plank that prohibits PICs, but they dropped that their plank is unpredictable, isn't derived from the text of resolution. The affirmative, when they're debating, don't know that the neg is going to read a PIC or not, which means that it's impossible for them to set a good norm. It's in the speech doc, and they dropped it, which means that all of our arguments about why fairness flips our way it was dropped. They extend all their arguments about why there's a topic version of the app, but a topic version of the app, one, this doesn't solve our offense. The neg can always read DAs and PICs to other types of the topic that it's just the debate never centers on our app and free speech. Since that would always read to things, boost to things like the revenge porn diss, that the specification is crucial. They say you can weigh the DA against the case. First, that you can read PICs, which means that solve the majority of our case offense, which means you can't weigh it. Second, that small apps are easily outweighed. Small apps like our free speech notes, which is only a particular type of college, are easily outweighed by huge dissets like hate speech and the title idea, which links to all other parts of the topic. They say read different advantages. Obviously, this is no longer a topical version of the app. You can just read a different advantage. Now on our interp. Extend our ground standard. They dropped that they kill education ensures that every single debate is about the app versus some hate speech pick. This also turns all of their education offense, because even if it's possible to have possible for the neg to have ground in this topic, ground under their interpretation, that promotes stale and repetitive debates. We've already want to turn to their fairness offense and say they crush limits and resulting in the app losing every single debate. We've also want an impact to education with the drop, because it means that every debate is the same, even if it's true that the neg has something to say. It's crucial to education requires that we research nuance, understands the topics such as free speech zones and different types of restrictions on speech, which means that our interp is crucial from education. They dropped their argument, so we have links to both fairness and education, which they have links to now, which means that you obviously have to vote for us. They say they extend competing interps. That's fine. We've already won that they promote bad norms or fairness. They create a model of debate where the neg reads a PIC every single debate about any type of speech that's bad, like hate speech, revenge porn, critique of military policy, whatever. That results in the affirmative never winning a debate, because they can always read a PIC out of something and it's impossible to prep. They say that it skews neg prep. We made an argument that flips the skew the other way, because now the app has to predict every type of PIC, which is worse since the 1 AR is already too short to generate new offense in the PIC. Their plank doesn't solve this because the app doesn't know that there's going to be a PIC read or not. They don't generate a good norm, and even if you don't think this is our good argument, it was dropped and entirely conceded, so all their fairness often flips our way. And we have an argument about why they result in stale and repetitive debates, which kills education. Good.